I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Racial prejudice is one of 3 principal reasons why, without bringing any charges against them, President Roosevelt and the elected officials of the United States Congress voted to force 112,000 Japanese American families into American concentration camps. Forced to leave their homes, essentially robbed of everything they had, not the least of which was their self-worth, their dignity, and worst of all, America's cherished promise to them, a chance for a better life. Some Americans, however, knew what was happening to them was both intolerable and unjust. At the risk of losing their friends, their jobs, or their social standing, these Americans stood beside their Japanese American neighbors and did what they knew in their hearts was right. Here are a few of their stories.
My parents, Ralph and Mary Smeltzer, grew up in Southern California. They were both members of the Church of the Brethren, which is a historic peace church, liberal Protestants, and they were school teachers in Los Angeles. They were also pacifists, so they were opposed to the war, to World War II. And then, since they were living in LA when December 7, 1941 happened, they were living near Japanese American communities. And then when the Exclusion Act came down, the order from Roosevelt, all of a sudden their neighbors were being rounded up and put in the horse stalls of the county fairgrounds. So they, along with other religious pacifists, the Quakers, the Friends, as well as the Brethren, they started organizing to support the Japanese Americans in detention. So because they were opposed to the war, they were in danger of losing their jobs as teachers. And in fact, as pacifists, they refused to sell war stamps. Evidently, teachers were asked to sell war stamps to support the war effort. So my dad lost his teaching job and was made a long-term substitute. So the writing was on the wall that they weren't going to be able to remain as teachers in the LA school district after the war started. That summer, as you know, the Japanese were being moved into the camps, they then decided to quit their jobs in LA, and they went to the federal government and applied to be teachers at Manzanar. So they were actually hired by the federal government as civilian employees and went to Manzanar, I think in September, to start teaching high school in the camp. Initially at Manzanar, they lived outside the camp with the other Caucasians, but they were very uncomfortable living with the Caucasians and just going into the camp to teach. So they asked to be assigned to a barracks in the camp. And so they ended up assigned as house parents in a barracks of young men called Kibe, who were Japanese Americans who'd been sent back to Japan for their education. The camps were a very difficult place to live, and my parents knew that if someone in the camp had a sponsor, someone who would help them find housing and help them find a job, they could get permission to leave the camp as long as they left the West Coast, as long as they left the exclusion zone. And so they knew that people were setting up relocation hostels through the Quakers, through other church groups. And so my parents asked the Church of the Brethren if they would help my parents set up a relocation hostel. And the Brethren said they would at the seminary in Chicago, at the Brethren Seminary. So around March, my dad actually left the camp and went to other camps to set up contacts so that they could get applications from different camps for people to come. And then my mother left Manzanar with several people from the camp to Chicago, to the seminary. And so initially they set up the relocation hostel at the seminary. So people would apply from the camps to the hostel. And if my parents accepted them, then they could leave the camp, and my parents agreed to provide housing and help them get jobs in the Chicago area. After they were at the seminary for a while, they then rented a big house on the North Shore of Chicago so they could bring more people. And so they had this big house, and people would apply to come to the hostel from different camps, and my parents would accept them. And so in the next 2 years, my parents helped about 1,000 people leave the camps, various camps, come to Chicago, live in the hostel until they could find their own place to live and get jobs.
I know that the president of the University of California, Berkeley, Robert Gordon Sproul, got together the heads of different universities, and they said, well, we really need an agency to do this, to help the students relocate, but we don't have the personnel to do it. Well, then they found out that the Quakers were willing to do it. So this whole student relocation program was done by the Quakers.
I had been working with the American for Service Committee because when I walked into that service committee office in 1958, I told them I wanted to do something for them. So they put me on all kinds of committees. And the last committee I was on was called the National Affirmative Action Committee. And we met in Philadelphia. And for one meeting, I got there very early, so I got permission to look into their archives. And I looked for boxes that said Student Relocation Committee, because that was a committee that was helping out the Japanese American college students. And I took out one of the boxes, and I was amazed to see it was all for one student, one Japanese student. And they had written all these letters to the college town, or the organization, asking for their cooperation and help and making sure that the student is going to be welcomed and treated well. And I thought about just looking at the math, that's about 100,000 letters. And these letters are written before the days of the computer. And it was all done in the carbon paper, duplicates, or mimeograph machines. And just thinking, you know, look at all the work that these people had done.
So Governor Carr fondly referred to the melting pot of the United States. He was fond of saying that the Constitution doesn't start out, we the people who are descendants of the English or of the French or of the Scandinavians. It says we the people of the United States, and that meant people of all races, people from all countries. That's what made this country great. That's the melting pot that Governor Carr spoke so highly of and held dear to the end of his life. So at a time when American citizens were being placed in internment camps, guarded by military police with machine guns without evidence of wrongdoing or any trial to determine guilt, Governor Carr's message to people out there was, what's to say that 6 months from now, you and I will not follow in that same internment camp, guarded by military police with machine guns without evidence of wrongdoing or any trial to determine guilt? What are we fighting for abroad if not to protect these very ideals at home? These ideals that the individual's rights, the Constitution, which is as sacred a document to Ralph Carr as any but the Bible, would have been violated and lost. Principles, Ralph Carr was fond of saying, are as true as truth and will last as long as God's creation. So Governor Carr said to the American-born citizen with Japanese parents, we look to you for example and guidance. And to the people who were not born in this country, he said we would extend the hand of friendship, secure in the knowledge that you will be as truly American as the rest of us. You can imagine at that time just how different that stand was, and really at a time when all of the other governors and all of the other nations' politicians were being critical of anyone of Japanese descent. It's rare to find any politician like Governor Carr who's willing to extend any hand of friendship toward them. So in the late part of 1941 and the early part of 1942, Governor Carr was being criticized pretty much every single day on the front page of the Denver Post. It was the most read newspaper in the state of Colorado and pretty much throughout the entire Mountain West. Fast forward about 50 some odd years, and that same individual who was lambasted every single day on the front pages of that paper was at the end of the 20th century named Colorado's Man of the Century. And you want to know why? because the newspaper said it was a decision of substance over style. They said Ralph Carr didn't bring the ski industry to Colorado. He didn't make a famous beer. He didn't even help them win a football Super Bowl or anything like that. But what Ralph Carr did, according to the newspaper, was he took a stand on behalf of people, a stand on behalf of individuals, a stand on behalf of liberty that simply would leave Colorado a more pleasant place, a more welcoming place to live in the next century.
What prompted me to write the book In Good Conscience, Supporting Japanese Americans During the Internment? Actually, when I was writing the book, we were deeply involved in the Iraq War. George W. Bush had just won election for the second time. And a lot of my friends who had been very active in trying to end the war were very discouraged. But I was writing this book about these people who stepped up after the incarceration, quit their jobs even, went to work in the camps because they knew they had to do something. Virginia Swanson was a Baptist missionary at Terminal Island, an isolated village in Los Angeles Harbor. When Japanese fishermen and their families were suddenly forced off the island with nowhere to go, Swanson rallied churches and community groups to provide emergency shelter. She supported Japanese Americans for the rest of her life. Reverend Herbert Nicholson, a Quaker missionary, served a Japanese congregation in Los Angeles. When they were sent to Manzanar, he brought them books, supplies, even a piano for church services. He visited all the camps many times, even the secret Department of Justice camps, and persuaded local and federal authorities to recognize their loyalty. Teacher Elizabeth Humbarger identified with Japanese American students at Stockton High School because she'd experienced anti-German prejudice during World War I. When her students were incarcerated at the local fairgrounds, she obtained surplus textbooks from the school district and helped her students organize a school behind barbed wire. Dr. Joseph Goodman, a Quaker and conscientious objector, left a prestigious job at San Francisco's Steinhardt Aquarium to teach at the Topaz internment camp in Utah. His social studies classes restored his students' faith in democracy. He urged them to apply for college, taught them how to negotiate with camp administrators, sponsored the student yearbook, and coached a winning football team. His students never forgot him.
I lived with Dr. Bruff's family, and so I was very exposed to everything about what the Quakers were doing. I remember when I was working for him, he kept loaning money to students who needed money to go to school, or our family that had nothing and wanted to start something. He would loan them money. And this is the kind of person he was. Of course, an assembly center was more or less a temporary. It was not the permanent place. And so Dr. Bruff used to come and visit me on Sundays, and he tried to bring things that would help to keep the spirit of the people more lively. Dr. Bruff brought albums, and we had this Santa Anita racetrack, so we had this big arena to give people a chance to gather together and listen to beautiful classical music. So we had what is called a music appreciation night, and we had this every Sunday, and it was just wonderful because it seemed, you know, with the music just blaring out into the air, and it was really a happy moment for 1 hour for all the people in camp that enjoyed music of that kind.